Hey, Jesse, tell Brad about the electronics markets in China, please.
I need to hear about the Shenzhen markets.
So sadly, they appear to be like, well, they may or may not be dying out, but they've been moving around. They've been getting, every time I've been there, more and more of the buildings have been getting renovated. The place you used to be able to get the fake iPhones became a perfume market. It's nuts.
But they're like multi-story, essentially like aisles and aisles and aisles of booths, right?
It is a district of Shenzhen. It's the Huajian Bay and Huajian Nan. So Huajian Road, north and south. There is literally a shopping mall full of iPhone cases. And each time I've gone, there have been different trendy things.
Okay.
So we had, I would usually have a day or two to kill in Shenzhen, and I was usually kind of bummed out with the old factory. And so at some point I tweeted, hey, would anyone want to give me $50 and I'll send you some random crap from Shenzhen? And got enough takers that I put a random box of crap from Shenzhen for $50 on our Shopify storefront. I limited it to 20 and I said it was only going to be shipped to the States because I didn't want a deal. And it sold out in a couple of hours. The second time around, I think we limited it to 100 and it sold out in minutes. But that first box, everybody got a tiny little drone. Everybody got a crazy cable that was both a a micro USB and a lightning cable in the same connector. I showed it to a friend at Apple and he basically melted. And everybody got a fidget spinner. Everybody got a fidget spinner like 2 weeks before they broke here.
I remember the year that we talked about this and I was like, these fidgets, but this is so stupid. Nobody's ever going to do this. And meanwhile, our friend Zach, who's Inventable Zach, was routing out fidget spinners for anybody who wanted them in another room at the event we were at. So like, but it's also really like so I love watching videos of people going to these. I mean, most of them are, like you said, probably from like 2015 at this point. I think
there's plenty of current. I mean, there is plenty of current content there. I mean, there's a whole mall of tiny little iPhone and other phone repair shops. I have had the privilege of getting to wander around Huajianan on the other side of the road with Scotty from Strange Parts. Scotty, you may know as the guy who built his own iPhone, who added a headphone jack back to a lightning only iPhone, he's done all kinds of amazing stuff. But he took me on a tour of sort of his favorite vendors, like the woman who would sell unpopulated iPhone logic boards, or the place you could buy a strip of like a dozen A8 chips, like iPhone core chips. Like, talking to Apple friends, you cannot actually use these things without being able to fuse them with Apple only tooling, but they clearly fell off the back of a truck somewhere. Most of these markets, they've got lots and lots of stuff out everywhere. You can touch things. And then there's the one market where you go up and there is basically nothing out. There are some price lists on shelves and everybody has a big safe. And that's the place you can buy used iPads. And it is not a place for tourists. It is a place for people to go buy hardware. It's like do not take pictures, be respectful. It is in most of the markets, haggling is normal. In this market, there is no haggling. If you try to haggle, they basically know that you're a tourist.
Wow.
In a lot of the markets, these are not really mostly there for individual sale. They're mostly wholesale. Everybody here has a Taobao shop and an AliExpress shop. Everybody I know who lives in Shenzhen has stories of buying something on Taobao and having it show up 10 minutes later because the shop they ordered it from on the internet was like 3 doors down. But you would say, I want to buy one, and they're like, no, don't want to sell one. And we're like, but if you go and say, how much does it cost to buy 50? Okay, can I buy a sample? Everybody loves that.
Of course.
Like don't be a dick about it, but that's.
What's the weirdest, best thing? Like, do you have anything that you use all the time that came from there, Jesse, still?
The force tester that I use to test how the force curves on a key switch is something that is a Chinese clone of $1,000 Japanese item that I bought for about $100 in those markets. It's sitting on my desk.
Hey, if it works.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. The serial protocol it speaks is a little bit weird, but it's a serial protocol that I can read. I had to reverse engineer it, but that was not a huge thing.
Sounds like a pretty good score. So is it safe to assume you passed on the loose strip of A8s?
I did pass on the strip of A8s, but I did buy the logic board because that was just cool.
Yeah.
I have a couple of fake iPhones. One was a fake iPhone mini that was 1.5 inches tall. I tried.
It's a mini iPhone mini.
Yeah, and I like this. This was a 2016 era iPhone mini when that wasn't a thing. I bought it. I tried to plug in a micro USB cable to charge it. It wasn't charging, and I looked a little closer and I realized it's because it had a lightning port.
Of course.
Of course it did. I was in Shenzhen shortly after the iPhone 10 launched, and I went into the Mingtong Digital Plaza where you would buy your fake iPhones, and I wandered around for a while, and I found a place that had fake iPhone 10s, and start talking to them and say, like, I want to buy one of these. And they talk to me for a while about it and say, okay, I'll buy that one. And they say, no, you don't want that one. You want the one that has the good display. Also, it reports itself as having twice as much storage. I'm like, twice as much storage? They're like, yes, both of them only have 16, but that one reports 128 instead of 64. They had iPhone 10s from 3 different vendors with 3 different fake versions of iOS. The one I bought, I brought home and I showed it to a friend who's an engineer for Apple, and he promptly opens up system preferences and starts looking at what it reports as its build number. And he's like, so I know this, you can't actually tell it's Android until you get a little bit deep in, at least in most of the apps. And he's like, the build number is correctly formed, but this is a build from next year. At the time they even had what was then the new App Store. And it was a fake Apple App Store, and it had clearly been translated from Chinese because it said in giant bold letters, "Where is my apps?"
Listen, I've heard Shenzhen is kind of a magical electronics wonderland, but I really wasn't expecting iPhones from the future.
Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad.
And today we're joined by a very special guest. Jesse Vincent of Keyboardio is joining us today to talk about, mechanical keyboards, making stuff, Chinese electronic markets. What else? I feel like that's a good
smattering.
Sounds good to me.
I can't see you shrug, Jesse. Go.
Anyway, hey, I'm Jesse. Nice to meet you, everybody.
Thank you so much for coming on, Jesse. I have used your keyboards for several years now. I'm a fan. And you have a Kickstarter going right now for the latest version of your mechanical ergonomic keyboard, which we'll get to in a little bit, I guess. But I kind of want to start, like, what's your you've been doing this for a long time now, and I'm kind of curious how you got started making like as a, like, I don't want to say artisan keyboards, because they're like small batch keyboards. They're awesome. I love them, and they're very cool, and they're special. And
I mean, there's wood in there. I think it's okay to say artisan.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, our goal, of course, is that they should be large batch keyboards, but this did very much start off as a hobby project. I had spent a career in software. I did spent time being responsible for Perl. I used to make an email client for Android. I had a SaaS startup that I'd been working on that cratered for very reasonable reasons. And I swore that I was going to take a year off to screw around. And about 6 months in, I realized that there were folks on the internet who were making their own keyboards. And I've had bad wrists my whole life. And that seemed like a lot of fun. And I figured...
This was like 2014, probably 2013.
2012. This was like 2012, I think.
Okay.
This was a while back. It was before keyboards were cool, you know. No, we totally took a little too long to get our first thing out, and keyboards got hip before we launched the first keyboard. But this was only intended to be a hobby project for a single month to make a single keyboard for myself. We have, as I say this kind of often, we failed thousands and thousands of times over in the best possible way. But that first keyboard that I made for myself, it was something like 40 hours of soldering because I hadn't soldered since I was 8 and had no idea what I was doing. One of the first mistakes I made is that I soldered all of the diodes in series rather than in parallel. You know, it's like I learned.
Hold on. What happens when you do that? Does that mean that one press hits every key on the keyboard?
It just doesn't work so well.
Okay.
And also I was doing all of this freehand with no circuit board because at the time it seemed like it would be scary to make circuit boards and it would be easier to just have a big old mess of wires. I've been forbidden to ever make a keyboard like that again. But these days I know how to design a reasonably simple circuit board, and there are plenty of suppliers that'll let us make them for cheap. But anyway, this was supposed to be a 1-month hobby project. And that was like, dear God, possibly 9 years ago now.
So it's really funny because in my ancient history, when I was at Maximum PC, I was the keyboard and mouse guy for a long time. And there was a moment when the Microsoft Natural Comfort, the forward tilt, the negative angle, I guess, is what everybody calls it now. Keyboard came out. I was like, oh, this is really cool. But it was a membrane keyboard, and it was like the price was right. They were like $25 to $50 or something like that. And that keyboard solved a lot of my wrist problems. And I remember going to Logitech and Microsoft and the people that were making gaming keyboards at the time. It's like, hey, why is nobody making an ergonomic gaming keyboard? And they laughed at me and they were like, it's because we like to sell products. You know, we're not doing that. And then a few years later, mechanical keyboards started taking off. And I remember talking to Logitech and saying, hey, why aren't you all doing a mechanical keyboard? And they're like, well, if we made a mechanical keyboard, we would absorb the entire Cherry Switch production capability for the planet on one product. And I was like, well, that's a little bit, that's kind of a flex, but okay.
That sounds right.
This was in probably 2011.
That's correct.
Now everybody's doing, everybody's doing mechanical keyboards. They're all using pretty standard switches for the most part now, or at least have that as an option. And the world has turned kind of your way in a lot of ways.
It has. So the Microsoft Natural series are amazing. They are I typed on one for 5+ years, or rather I typed on a long series of them. I had one in my backpack at all times. I was that dude at the conference who had the Microsoft Natural keyboard balanced in his lap because it was the only way my wrist would not hurt.
Yeah.
One of the problems with the Natural Elite, sort of the white one that was sort of the best known, longest lasting model, is that its traces melted in the rain. It was during the era in which you can imagine Microsoft would make a keyboard that would melt in the rain.
Hold on, what do you mean melted in the rain? I don't know.
I mean that if it got wet, it was ruined forever.
Oh, wow.
I bought them in 5-packs. Literally.
Okay. Interesting.
They Microsoft made a small business home office 5-pack SKU of that keyboard.
Wow.
But 2012, 2013 is right around when we started looking at manufacturing mechanical keyboards. I remember trying to source Cherry switches, and it was hard. I later talked to the regional sales director for Cherry, who said, look, what happened is the bottom fell out of the mechanical keyboard market sort of when, a good few years back, and the company got rid of most of its key switch making machinery because no one was buying them. And those are each individually $1 million machines because Cherry switches continue to be made only in Germany.
Yeah. And
so there really was not inventory. That flex from Logitech doesn't actually sound like it was a flex. I remember when we were designing the Model 1, we had intended to use Cherry switches, and we approached Cherry's Asia reseller, who told us that they could get us enough switches for 1,000 keyboards at a reasonable price by skimming them off some other larger orders, and that they could guarantee that in, a 8 or 12 week lead, and that, past that it might be hard, but they could do that. And we were already going to make more than 1,000 keyboards. And so it was the realization that there just was not availability of switches, even from somebody who wanted to help us.
Wow.
And that led us down a rabbit hole. That whole world has completely changed. What caused it to change is that Cherry's patents expired. And the first couple generations of clone switches from China were, well, garbage is the easy way to describe them. I actually went into Kaiwa with their brown switch and Cherry's brown switch. And I said, look, these feel different. And the salesperson went and got an engineer, and the engineer explained that they're supposed to feel different. Their switch has, 10% longer life. I said, that's great. Would you be interested? Could you make something that feels like the Cherry switches? And at the time they said, look, our boss wants to make our own products, not switches that feel like anybody else's, and they don't really want to do custom work. Now that's all changed.
Well, yeah, I was going to say now there's like switch proliferation. There's 5 different new switches that come out a week. It seems like some weeks.
It's nuts. I mean, I have these basically I have switch testers with a couple of 100 different switch variants on them. And this is only the stock switches from various manufacturers. So I have a line of 20 different red switches they're all supposed to feel the same. A line of 20 different brown switches that are all supposed to feel the same.
Wow.
And they're all varying qualities and have varying feels. But now there's this huge proliferation of switches being designed by hobbyists and either commissioning Kaiwa or Gateron or Duroc or one of a couple other switch factories to make a variant where it's make this piece out of this material, make this piece out of that material. The top needs to be yellow. The bottom needs to be Dayglow purple. And there's a lot of part of my problem with this is how much these switches get sold for. Because if you're buying direct from the factory and are a Chinese factory customer, you are probably not paying more than 15 cents US a switch.
Yeah.
And these switches sometimes get sold for upwards of $1 each.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's weird because once I realized that I could buy switches from AliExpress, it kind of changed my relationship with switches. Mm-hmm. It's a mixed bag. Sometimes you'll get a bag and
quite literally, right?
Literally it's a mix. Yeah. Literally it's a mixed bag, Brad. It's there'll be 15 bad switches in a bag of 60 or 80 or whatever.
That's fast. That suggests to me that somebody's buying rejects.
I mean, that's all I can assume but they're also so cheap. I don't care. Right. It works out.
So what's funny is if you look at the major switch resellers Shopify site, mm-hmm. their AliExpress site, and their Taobao site, Taobao being the essentially Chinese AliExpress for the Chinese market. The mm-hmm. pricing just drops and drops and drops as it goes from the fancy Shopify site to AliExpress to domestic. Yeah, it's wild.
It's such a weird time. It's been really fun because when we started Tested, this was one of those weird markets where I was like, oh, this is cool. We should pay attention to this. And then it's just exploded. And now, like I said, Logitech and Corsair and Razer and all the big keyboard manufacturers are making mechs now. Okay. So let's roll back and go. I want to talk about your,
sure.
Your journey with the Model 1.
Yeah.
Because you told me this story before and it's a good story.
Yeah.
But you also learned, I think, every hard lesson about hardware manufacturing. You're one of your story is one of the reasons when people ask me if they should do a hardware startup, I'm like, no, probably not. It seems it's really hard.
So we definitely played on hard mode the first time around, and we didn't know we were playing on hard mode. We came into this having never manufactured and shipped products before, which is good because if we knew what we were getting into, we absolutely wouldn't have gotten started. But the original plan for the Keyboardio Model 1 was going to be laser cut plywood and an Arduino socketed on a PCB and assembled in our living room. Brady Forrest suckered me into applying for Highway 1, which was an incubator that he was helping run at the time. And running through that, we visited Shenzhen for the first time. We made a bunch of very good connections in the industry around the Bay Area. We sort of learned what it looked like to make hardware, and we were forced to have the discipline to try, because it's quickly became not a hobby business. But when it started off, I had hand assembled a couple of keyboards and had written a blog post about everything I screwed up the first time I made a keyboard.
This was the wires one that you talked about a minute ago, right?
Yeah, I mean that was like one little problem. But on a lark, I'd added a sign up for my mailing list if you want to know about our keyboards, just having no idea what I was going to do with it. And then I went to bed, and the next morning it was at the top of Hacker News, and the next day it was still at the top of Hacker News, and there were 1,000 people on our mailing list. And then I wrote a part 2 the next weekend, and that stayed at the top of Hacker News for a day. And a couple of prototypes in, people started saying, hey, where can we buy that? These were these like laser cut pieces of acrylic with freehand wires and all kinds of craziness. But people wanted to buy them. And so we figured, well, we'll try to do this thing. We made, I think, 3 prototypes and asked our mailing list, would anyone like to beta test this hardware that we might kickstart? And we sent out mail to that mailing list and got back something like 100 or 125 replies within 24 hours from people explaining why they needed to be the one to beta test. We had people writing poetry, prose, creepy fanfic. One dude in Hong Kong recorded a music video shot in 3 locations about why he needed to be a beta tester.
Please tell me he got it.
Oh, hell yes.
That's a lot of effort.
Yeah. No, and then when I went to visit Shenzhen, I actually got to meet him,
cool.
which was super cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And that was right around when we applied to Highway 1, got into Highway 1, ran through it, and sort of had to make it more real than laser cut plywood and an Arduino stuck on a circuit board.
It's okay. So you've got to Highway 1. I assume at that point you started. Highway 1 was a hardware incubator, right? Primarily?
Yes. Yeah. Exclusively.
And at that point you like got connected with designers, and kind of they did the thing that accelerators are supposed to do, where they helped you learn the hard parts the easy way rather than the hard way, or at least some of them. We were only the second batch, and so they were still definitely feeling their way. And they were an accelerator that was tied to a manufacturing company. And so there was some intent that it might be a feeder for their what's called low volume, high mix manufacturing, where they can make a small number for a large company of lots of different products. Okay. That didn't end up panning out, but like they gave us some sense of what it looked like to manufacture. But we were still kind of doing things at a different scale than everybody else. We were thinking low thousands production volume for that first production run. If we got lucky. Yeah.
There's this thing called the Valley of Death in hardware, and it's if you're making more than 100 and less than 10,000 or less than 100,000, it's going to hurt real bad, because 100 you can absolutely do at your kitchen table. 10,000, it's worth money to have process automation and all that. 1,000 you can't hand assemble, and it does not make sense to make a robot.
Yeah.
But a lot's changed since this conventional wisdom became conventional wisdom.
Yeah, I was going to say the big thing seems to be that Kickstarter kind of, Kickstarter helped a lot of people both land in that spot and get through that spot, it seemed like. And I'm curious how it worked out for you.
I mean, Kickstarter helps you get into that problem. I don't know that it helps you get out of that problem, because we love Kickstarter. I mean, there's a reason why pretty much every serious thing we've launched has been a Kickstarter. It is really convenient to be able to go to your manufacturer and say, hey, look, we have committed orders for this number of parts, and we even have the money from those customers so we can afford to pay for tooling.
Yeah.
Even this time around, some suppliers who had been very lukewarm on working with us discovered the Kickstarter about a week in, saw that we had hit our $100,000 goal in 18 minutes and gone over $300,000 in like the first day or so, and became a lot more solicitous.
I was going to say, we should explain what tooling is for people who may not know.
Sure.
It's a manufacturing concept. And I bet a lot of people don't understand what you're talking about.
So people ask us something as simple as the rubber feet on our keyboard. So one has fallen off and a customer writes saying, hey, what's the part number for this? Where can I buy it? And we have to explain that there is pretty much nothing that comes off the shelf when you're manufacturing. Those rubber feet are from a custom mold that's made, I think that one might actually be simply out of aluminum in China, where they they compress silicone inside these two pieces of metal to get the exact shapes we want. It is not a part from McMaster. For keycaps, the way that those are made in volume is you've got two giant hunks of steel that have holes cut into them, and then they spray molten plastic into them under huge amounts of pressure. And it'll cool off relatively quickly inside that tooling, inside those hunks of steel. And when they pop open, you've got these warm, hot off the presses keycaps.
Have you seen this happen? Have you been to the factory where they do this?
No, I have. When we were doing the Atrius, which is our last keyboard, I was there the day they were doing the test runs for the sort of the tray, the bottom part of the keyboard. And I literally was able to grab pieces as they popped out of the injection mold, literally hot off the presses.
So you started with the board design. You knew you wanted to do an ergo design or a split design. And then, but also you were using, because of that, there weren't keycaps. You couldn't buy off the shelf keycaps, right?
Well, so when we first got started, we assumed we were going to do what a lot of these ergonomic mechanical keyboards do, which is just have some gaps in the spacing on the keyboard. That's the sort of standard thing. We got told by somebody who has advised one of the largest companies in the world on their ergonomic keyboards that there was no way we would be able to afford custom tooling for 64 keycaps, because that is an investment of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
But
we verified these facts. They were wrong. I later met the person who worked for the large company that made keyboards and said, oh yeah, that guy, I gave him that number because that's what it takes when we, giant company, are making this tooling. And, we're making 6 sets of tooling and we're doing very high volume, very fancy tooling at a very fancy factory.
But I mean, in this case, so the tooling is machined out to be like a negative of the keycap and on each side. And so when it mashes together, there's space for the plastic to get shot in. And
yes,
I mean, this is how injection molding works, right? Yeah.
And our keycap tooling absolutely costs tens of thousands of dollars, but it doesn't cost hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I thought it was way more expensive than that. Holy cow. I'm going to get in the keycap business, Jesse.
We should talk later. Will is shaking his head no.
Yeah.
So I was talking about something about the keycap tooling.
Oh, about taking the warm caps off the line.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've actually got a question there. I mean, when you're first setting up the tooling, when they are popping what I assume are samples out, I mean, how much trial and error, how much iteration is involved there? Do you have to be there for some period of days, like checking iterative samples and like tweaking, like, okay, this is wrong, this needs to be tweaked? Like, how much?
It's a lot nicer when you can. Which we can't right now.
Sure.
So the way they describe the way that manufacturers talk about tweaking the tooling as stuff comes off, as the samples come out of the injection molds, T0 or T1 is that first trial. Different people say T0 or T1 depending, and then T2, T3, T4, and usually you need like a couple of tweaks before they get some of the tolerances right. Our factory for the Model 100, last week they showed us the T0 keycaps because we had to completely redo the keycaps with the new factory for the new key switches. Everything fit with the T0. There were some issues with what are called the runners, or the gates that sort of keep the keycaps together as they come out of the mold. Those they need to improve before mass production. And they got the homing dots wrong on 2 of the keycaps. They put them in the wrong place, which is kind of pain, but they'll fix it.
Yeah. Well, when they fix that, do they have to completely remachine the blocks, or can they just solder stuff back in and kind of?
I mean, it's weld, not solder, but that is used. I mean, so if they need to do something where there should be more plastic that ends up in the final product, that's free. They just cut it. They just cut more steel away. When they need to remove plastic, they need to basically weld something in place. And so what they're going to end up doing is welding a patch and then remachining that little patch. And that can have issues. You can end up with sort of a little part line where they did the patch if they don't do it cleanly enough. And we've warned them that if that happens, they're going to have to remachine that entire cavity. Which is like they weld a bigger piece in and then they machine it again. It's not the end of the world, but it's annoying.
So, okay, so this is maybe a stupid question, but when you take the shot keycaps out for manufacturing, are they in a rigid thing of sprue where you can just, then the machine picks them up and you can put them on the keyboard all at once and smash all the caps in place?
So there are some different ways of doing this. You wouldn't usually have, you can do it that way at a moderately high end, but you may not want to. If, for example, the keycaps need to get painted and laser engraved, you probably want to paint them before you put them on the keyboard.
That makes sense, yeah.
And so with the Model 1, the factory that did the keycaps had something that would cut them off the sprue as they came out of the injection mold, as they came out of the machine, and slam them onto a painting jig. And the only problem is that they tried to cheap out on the amount of steel they needed for the tooling, so they put them too close together. So it was impossible to paint all the sides well. So they ended up having to then take half them off the painting jig. And then it was a catastrophe.
Yeah.
They had like a 50% spoilage rate in the beginning. It was horrible. Now, conveniently, the factory that's doing the Model 100 with us, they helped us do the last run of keycaps for the Model 1 because the previous factory and we were no longer on speaking terms. They actually ran into this. They didn't have the really cool transfer tool, transfer vacuum suction thing. And so they were taking the keycaps on the sprue out of the tool by hand, except that sprue was designed to fall off. So the first time they tried to do it, the injection molding machine opens and the keycaps just explode outwards. To make it go, they ended up buying foot-wide transfer tape. So like basically very, very soft masking tape, and using that to pull the keycaps out of the tooling.
Wow.
Having seen that, they did a really nice job on the design for the Model 100 where the sprue becomes the painting jig. So the keycaps stay on the sprue. It's what's called edge gating. So rather than having the runners or the sprue that hold the keycaps in, or that allow the plastic to get to the cavities, rather than having that on the sides of the keycaps, it's the bottom edge. So you won't see like a dot on the side of the keycap.
Oh, that's awesome. It's a thing that I think people don't realize is that, like, when you design a product like this, it's not just designing the product, it's also designing the manufacturer for the product and every aspect, and like how much every aspect of that has to be thoughtful and like how much expertise goes into all of that.
I just want to throw in real fast, like when you said at the top of this, like if you had known how hard it would be, you wouldn't have done it. And I was sitting there like, really? Was it really that bad? And I feel like you've already provided like 3 or 4 examples of like, I've heard things where I was like, yeah, wow, I sure as hell wouldn't do that either.
Oh man, this is the easy shit.
like I'm sitting here thinking about arguing with like the factory that screwed up half of your keycaps and like what the resolution that situation might have reached, like it just sounds like a lot of trouble.
So the very long and short of, we went through with that first keyboard, we went through every manufacturing problem that anybody has ever heard of. I don't think that we I don't think we ever actually got handed parts that we know to have been counterfeit. But other than that, anytime we had weird problems. We had factories that supposedly closed down for fires. We had things that supposedly got lost. We had suppliers that, obviously didn't deliver the thing they promised, untested parts, weird work stoppages. And every time we dug into one of them, there was enough truth there that we said, okay, that we see what's going on there. And every time I talked to a professional who'd been doing this for 20 years, they said, yeah, that's a thing that really happens. But Jesse, all these problems don't happen to this. Nobody ever has all the problems.
You won the lottery.
Until finally we figured out what had been going on.
What was it?
The director of the person who was, to this time, to our knowledge, the director of overseas sales of the factory. When we found out she was no longer the director of overseas sales, she was a contract salesperson who had one customer, us. Turned out she was a con artist grifter who'd been scamming both sides and embezzling money. Ouch. She'd been telling us all the reasons why the factory needed to be paid a little bit early and sort of bad-mouthing other people at the factory to us. And she'd been explaining to the factory that we were paying a little bit late and we were a little bit short because we were having a really hard time with sales.
So the 5-finger discount. Wow. That's not
crap.
Good.
Changed bank accounts, the whole thing. And when she changed bank accounts on us, we emailed the factory owner and said, we want to confirm that this is what's going on. And heard back circuitously that was right, which he later denied because it of course was not right. It was, and nobody that we work with in China believed that it was happening because nobody does this, because the penalties are so stiff. This was 10 years to life in a Chinese prison kind of thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we wrote about all of this pretty extensively in the backer updates for the Model 1. None of this is a big reveal here. You can read all those updates if you want to. We just compiled them into a PDF that we don't know what we're going to do with. It's a 472-page book.
I was going to say, one of the things that I learned from your Kickstarters is that your your updates are there's no mystery as to what's going on with the money. That when I back your Kickstarter, I know exactly what's going on with my money and how it's going, because you all there was no varnishing anything at any point along the way. It seemed like, except for the keyboards, of course.
Yes, the keyboards did get a nice polyurethane coat on the wood that was mixed with what we were initially told was banana oil, which sounded kind of weird until I started Googling and realized that was not a bad translation, but that is in fact the name of, it actually used to be a shellac that got used on the wings of canvas aircraft, but it helps dilute it helps dilute polyurethane and allows it to penetrate slightly better into the wood. And I discovered one day when we were modifying a keyboard enclosure that the room was filled with the smell of bananas. It doesn't come from bananas, but it smells like bananas, as I understand it.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So you have keycaps, you have a board design. Theoretically at this point, you're manufacturing a board. I assume that manufacturing boards is fairly straightforward.
You'd think that. So we ran in, so part of it is component selection. And one of the things that you run into when you're working with the factories, they have their recommended vendors. You have your preferred vendors. And one of the parts that was a little bit harder to get was the Taiwanese LEDs that we'd picked. And the factory subbed a Chinese LED, with our knowledge, subbed a Chinese LED that was supposed to be compatible. Friends of mine had used it and said it's better. It's it is actually an improved version of the thing that we were going to use, except on our boards, there was an audible whine. And we sort of discovered this. We proved it. When you add more capacitance to the circuit board, it goes away. We had to add approximately 1 farad of capacitance before it goes away. That would be a capacitor about the size of a baby's fist.
It's a pretty big capacitor for a keyboard.
It was kind of cool because after you unplugged the keyboard from the computer, the LEDs worked for a good 20 seconds. But the factory brought in the LED vendor. They brought in their design team, including the engineer who had done the silicon inside the LEDs. And he's like, well, first off, this is the old chip inside there. And I didn't know we were actually selling these to anybody anymore. But I think if we did a different wire bond for you and attached that might make it go away. And so for an order that was like 200,000 LEDs, these LEDs, cost less than a dime each. They were willing to spin a custom part for us.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it didn't work, but it was amazing.
Yeah.
At least they tried.
Yeah. The keyboard PCBs in China are a little weird because they're usually pretty big circuit boards compared to a lot of others. And so that usually means they're using circuit houses that are older process. So, we showed up with a USB-C connector slightly before that was trendy and other small traces. And the factory's normal PCB creation partner sort of looked and was like, no, we can't do these. We can't hit those tolerances. The first batch of keyboards that got assembled, they were running late, and I had delayed my trip home from China. And so the factory found another supplier that would do the assembly. They came back with LEDs at like a funny angle, diodes that were missing. But this was like a small time factory that was just not paying good attention. It's like, you would think that circuit board assembly is commodity, and it should be. And now it is. Like we have much better vendors now.
Yeah.
We know what to look for.
Sure. How much time how long were each of these trips over there? And then how many times a year were you doing this? I'm just curious, like what footprint on your life and your schedule these trips took.
It varied. I would never really go for less than 10 days because by the time you're there, it's just not worth it to go and come back that fast. I was usually going 3 or 4 times a year. 10 days at the low end and a month at the high end when we were still trying to figure things out. And so when we were just starting to get ready to do the Atrius with the new factory, I went and planned a 10-day trip to work through whatever were going to be the manufacturing problems. And I get there on a Sunday, go in on Monday morning, and by Monday at 4, we have knocked off 98% of what needs to happen. Because it turns out that it's not that you need to spend a month in the factory. It's that you need to spend time in the factory without the person who's supposed to be your advocate actively sabotaging you.
Oh no.
It's been, it was fascinating to sort of discover that it doesn't have to be that painful. I have not been back to China since I think I can't remember if it was December 2019 or the first week of January 2020. But essentially just before no one was going to travel anymore.
Yeah, I was going to say, because the Atrius was manufacturing started right before the pandemic. Is that right?
Oh, no. We did the Kickstarter so the Atrius is an ultra portable 44 key keyboard that is perfect to take with you everywhere. We launched the campaign in the middle of March of 2020.
Oh God. Okay. That's right. Because I talked to you about it when I saw you in Chicago in January, I bet.
Yeah. No, we launched right around when the stay-at-home orders dropped.
But so at that point, had you done all the pre-production and stuff on the keyboard? So
that for the Atrius, I had approved most of the plastics. We thought we'd approved the key plates. We knew we hadn't figured out the keycap labeling solution yet because we wanted black PBT keycaps with white letters, which turns out to be hard. Go figure. No, the factory didn't know either. But the circuit boards were basically sorted out. And we delivered the early delivery keyboards pretty much on time. And we delivered the regular keyboards about 2 to 3 weeks late because even though we'd taken COVID craziness into account, we had not taken it enough into account.
I think you did, like, if you shipped within a month of your target, I think you did pretty well, given given that we at large portions of the country couldn't get toilet paper mid-April last year. So yeah,
we're happy with how we did. Shipping was a nightmare for sure. Because most of the cheap carriers, the way they work is that they buy cargo space on commercial flights. And when there are no commercial flights, they don't ship. So one of the cheapest options was Singapore Post's Q something or other service. We had stuff that would get out of Hong Kong within 24 hours, get scanned in Singapore, and then sit for 6+ weeks before it moved onward from Singapore.
Wow. So how has pandemic stuff affected the new keyboard? I mean, actually, tell me a little bit about the new keyboard. We should talk about that while we're in the
Yeah, the new keyboard is the Keyboardio Model 100. If it's not in the show notes and somebody wants to find it, if they go to shop.keyboard.io, right now the top hero image is a link to the Kickstarter, and later the top hero image will sell you something whenever you're listening to this. All right, that's enough commercial spiel for me. So we had intended to do this keyboard last year. I think we'd intended to do it the year before that, but everything goes slower in a pandemic. So it's an updated version of the Model 1. It is the same butterfly shape. The plan is now that instead of everybody getting it in maple, you get it in your choice of maple or walnut. And there's a fun supply chain issue we can talk about there. We switched from Matthias Alps switches to hot swappable MX style switches from Kaiwa. We're redoing the LEDs, and we are in the process of trying to swap out the main microcontroller from an AVR, the same thing that's in an Arduino Leonardo, to a fancy Cortex M4 with looks like it's going to be a meg of flash and 96K of RAM. Instead of, instead of 32K of flash and 2.5K of RAM. And it's going to be cheaper for us to make it that way.
Well, that's like win-win-win.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the only thing is that there is not an Arduino core for this chip right now. So that's what we're doing to make sure it works. Okay. Also, we're in the middle of the Chipocalypse.
Yeah. So explain the Chipocalypse. We hear... Look, we've spent a lot of time in the last year talking about hardware shortages, whether it's not being able to get video cards or consoles, like at the high end consumer side. Like, you have a better idea of why that's actually happening, I think, than we do.
I certainly hear sets of stories, and I have not really paid attention to the early side of it because I am much more in the weeds of how do I get my damn chips. Because what we're seeing right now, I mean, things that ordinarily have a 6 to 8 week or maybe a 13-week lead time, people are talking about 56 and 64-week lead times.
Wow.
So, a friend of mine got quoted a 62-week lead time for a diode last month.
Wow.
It is clearly a very special diode, but more than a year.
It's 5 years. Oh, no, 62 weeks. 62 weeks.
62 weeks, sorry, not 62 months.
It's like 5 years. What the hell?
No.
That's still intense.
But like chip, and if you can get the chips, the prices are through the roof. Chips that, a chip that used to cost $1 something might cost $4, or a chip that costs $3 costs $12.
And these are commodity parts, I'm assuming. Like
these are commodity,
nothing unusual, right? Not exotic.
The if something's really exotic, you're probably okay. Nobody's using
there's not
it.
As much demand, right?
I've heard unsourced reports of adversarial hoarding.
Okay.
Given how bad availability is right now, I've heard some reports of people buying up rare chips that they know their competitors need just to corner the market. Well,
so I was going to say, I heard from a friend who shall remain nameless, but works in the space that they've suspected that that's happening for things like specific diodes and MOSFETs and stuff like that. And that it's to the point that they're wondering if there are vendors that are literally studying what's available and gobbling up availability specifically to cause problems for their competitors, which I wouldn't doubt that at this point. But
yeah,
that's bonkers.
It's crazy. Like we're in the process of attempting to pre-buy all of the chips that we believe are supply constrained that we're going to need for the Model 100. We at least still have the capability to redesign if we can't get something we need. I was going to say, are you going to literally look at your design? Like in this case, your design is going to be informed not just by the design and what's the cheapest, best parts, best bang for the buck, but you're also going to have to redesign based on what LEDs you can get, what diodes you can get, all that. That's incredible. So the LEDs and diodes are a little bit more commodity, and those don't appear to be the things that at the scale we work are really a problem right now. Not compared to ICs.
Okay.
So like the one that I'm
integrated circuits for people.
So like the chips, the actual chips. What get called jelly beans, like this, it doesn't really matter who you get them from, like the diodes and the resistors and the capacitors. That stuff doesn't seem to be as bad right now. But like the controller for our LEDs, the chip we use to let the two halves of the Model 100 talk to each other, that seems to be through the roof and have some availability issues. And so I'm waiting for this quotation from our factory for what their vendors have told them is available.
Wow.
So it's a differential I2C transceiver. So it takes a signal that is usually on two wires and runs it over two pairs of wires for the interconnect between the two hands to allow it to run over greater distances and to be more immune to noise. One of our competitors doesn't do this. And if you put your cell phone in the middle of their keyboard and it rings, you lose the right half of the keyboard.
Oh boy.
But I approached one of our vendors about, do you have something on your rate card or on your line card from somebody you represent that would that I could replace this chip with? And they got back to me today saying, well, there's this FPGA vendor in China we work with who would be willing to do the custom firmware in-house, and we could just replace this chip with a custom programmed FPGA.
That's ridiculous.
And it's price competitive.
Wow. Really? Oh, I thought I was waiting for the part where you said it was going to cost like 50 times as much.
No, it's going to cost, I want to say like 10% more than it would have cost in a normal year.
Wow.
But that falls like, that may run afoul of Segalsky's law. If you know Mache, who runs Pinboard, he has this famous saying about technology: if I'm excited about it, it doesn't belong in production.
Okay.
And like a novel firmware on an FPGA to replace a chip, we're trying to ship early delivery units in November and mass production in January. I'm willing to pay a little bit more money right now to have something stable.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like keyboard's not a place that I want to have a lot of experimentation. Like I want the areas where the experimentation happens to be well-defined and established, and not be surprises. Although, I mean, it does seem like it would be cool to run like an 8088 simulator on your FPGA in the keyboard.
We actually have a friend, Pyotr Zdentybinski, who's he's 1-Bit Squared is his company. They start off making UAV, like little Arduino programmable UAVs, and he's doing a lot of open source FPGA work. He just did a version of our Atrius that is compatible with our plate and our enclosure that is entirely built in an FPGA. And so it's super cool. It's super efficient. I'm personally still unconvinced that it is worth doing for most people, but it's real cool.
I mean, look, if we were, everything starts, it turns out, with you wanting to make something cool for yourself, right? Absolutely.
And he makes FPGA stuff. Being able to use the FPGA stuff for real uses makes tons of sense.
Well, I mean, it's like the old, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail. Once you know how to program FPGAs, everything looks like it's an FPGA problem.
Right. So if your listeners aren't familiar with FPGAs, they basically let you do hardware and software.
So you can reprogram a chip on the fly to
be any other chip that will fit into the logic gates, right?
Yeah. So you can now get an open source RISC-V CPU core for an FPGA.
We've talked a lot about FPGA applications here in the past. We haven't talked about FPGA.
Yeah, we big Mr. Fans around here if you're familiar with that project.
So the keyboard's in process. The Kickstarter has like a week left. Like how you have new factories online. You don't have the bad actor in between you and the people doing the work.
I'm sorry if I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't delve into this particular rabbit hole. Did this person? Do you know what their ultimate fate was? Did they end up in prison? Maybe we shouldn't talk about it.
So I will be slightly circumspect, but what I will say is that we have a very good Chinese lawyer in China. She ended up convincing the factory to take responsibility for the actions of their then former salesperson. And they did end up reneging on those commitments that they had made in writing with the Chinese contract. And so we ended up having to pursue them through the Chinese legal system. The Chinese legal system did work on our behalf, and a judge ordered them to return our tooling and to return product they had made for us that we had paid for. They did not return our time. They did not return our money. But we ended up agreeing with our lawyer's estimation that it made more sense to go after the factory than to go after their salesperson.
I mean, that makes sense. It's still a horrific first product out there.
I mean, nowhere to go but up from there.
Yeah,
right?
What a way to start, Jesse.
Yeah, no, it was quite an experience. But
how about can we talk about RGB a little bit? Because like this is a thing that's it's become popular over the recent years. How much complication does that add to the design? And how? I mean, there's different scales of lights on a keyboard, right? We have fixed color lights underneath the keys. That's pretty straightforward. We have RGB lights that we can program when you write firmware to the keyboard, which is more complicated, but still reasonably straightforward. And then we have like crazy gaming keyboards where when you fire up Overwatch and you switch characters, the lighting layout changes to match the keys that you use for that particular character. And yes. I'm curious, like what the difficulty curve is on your side for the different layers there.
So there's one in the middle that you may not have been aware of, and I'll go through that. So single color LEDs, especially if you don't need to toggle them on and off individually, very easy. Mm-hmm. By the time you need to toggle them on, by the time you want to be able to control each one, that means you need some kind of LED driver or to have LEDs that have a smart driver inside them, like what Adafruit sells as NeoPixels or dot stars.
Got it.
And so those are very popular in the hobbyist world because the board layout is very simple. You basically have a strip or a chain of LEDs.
These are the ones where you load up the packet with the commands for all the LEDs, and each one chunks off one command and passes it on.
Yes, exactly. It's you basically spew it. Each LED gets 3 or 4 bytes of information, and then cuts the head off the data and passes the rest onward.
And so that is a lot of heat though, and use a lot of power, right?
They were designed for architectural use. You can get them in different form factors now that have, different power profiles, but yeah, we used those in the Model 1, and we programmatically limited it and physically limited it to being able to draw 1.6 amps, which is about what you can expect out of a laptop that's willing to give you a lot of power out of a USB port.
Okay.
The USB spec says you're only supposed to ask for half an amp traditionally. 1.6 is what a MacBook or a ThinkPad will give you before it starts to wonder if something is shorting out. If we drove the 64 LEDs in the Model 1 at full brightness with no limit, we would be looking at pulling 4 amps of power.
Yeah.
And so for the Model 100, what we're doing is using dumb LEDs, like they have an R pixel, a G pixel, and a B pixel, a red, a green, and a blue. And the pins are a current source and then syncs for those 3 pixels. And so you need to have a separate external controller. And so we can get the same kind of brightness that we got out of the Model 1, but with less than a third of the power. They do require a driver chip of some kind. And so that we then talk to over I2. Actually, that might be, I don't remember what we talked to it over, but it's basically we program it directly, and it then deals with lighting up the right pixels. So it's a little more complicated to lay out. It is harder to do as a hobbyist because you have a bunch more fine pitch pins. It's not dramatically more complicated, but it is a little bit harder to write to.
Does it make the board? Do you have to do more layers on the board or anything like that, or is it
no?
Still...
We still only do 2-layer boards.
Okay.
We once had a manufacturing engineer at a large consumer electronics company look at our board and say, you could make these 1-layer boards with some carbon trace printing on the other side. It would save you 10%. How much are they going to be if we don't do that? $1. And it's like, but that is kind of that's a specialist technique that doesn't make any sense at our volume.
Yeah.
But no, I've still only ever designed 2-layer boards. So because chips are starting to get scarce, I did ask our factory what what microcontrollers they're using for their keyboards, or their clients using for their fancy keyboards. And they handed me a Chinese data sheet for something that speaks, USB HID profiles on one end and actually has key matrix scanning and built into the same chip, and also has LED matrix driving with a dozen optional LED effects burned in to the ROM. You don't get to choose which LED effects you get past which one of these you want to enable.
You can have the waterfall or the rainbow, okay?
Yeah, I mean, you can have the rainbow left and right. I think you might be able to change the speed of the rainbow.
Okay.
But, the things we want are, the ability for users to write their own LED effects, or to be able to drive the LED effects over a serial protocol, which is a thing that we and most other hackers firmwares offer these days. The gaming companies are getting a little more open with their protocols, but it is all still around here. Yes, this is how you write to our protocol so that you can drive our keyboards.
But yeah, it's a co-marketing money thing a lot of times. So it turns out the Razer people only want the Razer keyboards to work with the Razer thing that they paid to develop anyway.
Yes, no, we actually talked to them very early on about whether we could get access to Razer switches. They had us sign some agreements, and then they just kind of ghosted. But that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But
the upshot is But now you have serial communications so that you can control the lights dynamically using your software or something.
Yeah. Control the lights, change the layout on the fly, do other crazy things you want to do.
I always wonder, I'm the worst in the world about layout changes on keyboards. I just use one layout no matter what, because my brain is not plastic enough to change layouts on the fly anymore. But so what we're talking about changing layouts is, for example, on the Atrius, if you want to use a numpad, then you can go down a layer and the right hand side of the keyboard will be a numpad at that point.
It's like you can write your own function key that changes the behavior of any of the other keys. So you can write your own shift key, or you can write macros, or you can make a key that is sticky when you double tap it, or you can write a key that will strafe in your game, but do it with enough randomness that the anti-cheating protections don't kick in.
No, we don't like those.
We do not recommend this, and we believe it to be somewhat immoral. But we know that there are a lot of folks out there who are immoral.
But great also, power, great responsibility.
But also, some people have different keyboard layouts for when they're writing. If they write a lot of code, if they're writing JavaScript or something, then they'll have a JavaScript layout that puts the keys that you constantly hit when you're writing JavaScript someplace where they're easily accessible, and they'll switch back to a more standard QWERTY like when they're doing word writing and stuff like that. So
yeah.
It is a power user feature for power users. I would
Absolutely. Or you learn to type in Dvorak, or one of the power user things I've never managed to wrap my brain around, but some people absolutely love, is putting your numbers on the home row.
Oh.
Huh.
So like you don't have to reach, you do something with your thumb. Wow. One of the actual useful things that we did with this super programmability for a customer who had De-Quervain syndrome and it had hand surgery is he wrote to us and he's like, what do you recommend while I can only use my left hand and I've got to get work done? And so we implemented Edgar Matish's half QWERTY using the Model 1's palm key, where when you drop your palm onto that other button, it makes the keyboard a mirror of what the other hand would be.
I was going to say one of my friends in college had one hand, and he did the same thing with I don't know if you remember, but remember those keyboards that you put your fingers in the holes and
a data hand, data
hands, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I've got one of those back there.
Oh, I know about you and the keyboards, Jesse.
I think Marcin has more keyboards than me now.
Look, Marcin's writing a book. He should have more. We still need to have Marcin on the show to talk about.
You should have Marcin on the show, absolutely.
I feel like we've kind of glossed over a lot of stuff here. It's really complicated. Is the most probably the biggest understatement I've ever made on the show to date. But I don't know, Brad. What do you feel like? We haven't talked about lumber at all, which is like you do a gorgeous wooden case for these keyboards.
Yeah,
and I know it has to be just like an absolute boondoggle. From a manufacturing standpoint, but I'm so happy that you do them. So
the first time around, when we spec'd this on Kickstarter, when we didn't really know how many we were going to make, we do care about not doing horrible things to the world. And we spec'd Canadian maple, which basically grows like a weed. And then we ended up manufacturing in southern China. And so when you mill a keyboard enclosure out of Canadian maple in southern China, it has to be shipped from North America.
So you're shipping both ways now.
Shipping both ways. And then for the Model 100, we're giving folks the choice of maple or walnut. And we hit up our wood vendor to get a quote just before the campaign to make sure we knew what our numbers looked like. And he warned us that, yes, prices have gone up, but also right now they can't get solid boards in maple or walnut that are wide enough because their importer's supply of maple and walnut boards is sitting on the docks at origin. Now, because of the global container shortage,
right?
Which I'm not 100% sure I believe, because there's still plenty of stuff being shipped out from China. And so going back to China shouldn't be too bad. I asked them if they could tell us where the walnut was coming from so I could try and understand what's going on. And so they sent us a bill of lading from the last order. So that walnut is being felled in Kentucky, and as far as I can tell, is sitting on the docks in Virginia Beach.
Wow.
Waiting to go to China.
Wow, that's the long way around, I guess.
I had kind of assumed, it's coming out of Port of Oakland or Port of LA or something like that, but nope. They're working it through for us. Okay. They offered us joined walnut, and they did some samples, basically like butcher block style.
Yeah.
And I said, no, our customers won't take that. And they said, let's make some samples and then we can see if it looks good. And 3 nights ago, I got a WeChat message from our wood guy with a series of 6 photos in rapid succession and then 2 giant crying emoji. And I'm like, no. Yeah, that's not going to work. He's like, there's a reason I sent you pictures and didn't FedEx it. As soon as I saw it, I knew it wasn't going to work.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at least you have a partner there that like knows what you're looking for and stuff like that at this point, right?
Yeah. We've got a bunch of partners and suppliers who I trust to be operating in their own interests and transparent with me about it.
It's so when you're manufacturing, so you collect all the parts, you know what's going to go into this. you send them all to one factory and then the line fires up when everything arrives? Is that how it works?
So that's called consignment. And so that would be like where, and there are some Western companies that do it this way. They don't want the factory to be able to, run a ghost shift and make more of their thing.
Okay.
Honestly, for anything at the complexity level we're making, if somebody in China wanted to clone our product, what they'd have to do is buy one.
Okay.
And I do actually believe that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Somebody who's going to clone our product isn't going to clone what makes them good. They're going to clone what they look like. And so in general, we would rather allow our factory to be on the hook for sourcing most of what we need. There's some things where we do consign them. So the wood, because keyboard factories don't know much about wood, we typically consign the wood, though we allow them, or we beg the vendors to work directly together to do to make sure things get to the right place and to deal with problems with parts and schedules and things like that. The travel cases we sourced on our own because we did them at a time when we weren't really working directly with the factory. Our Chinese PM is currently has a vendor he really likes for packaging. And so he is going to have us consign our packaging to the factory, even though our factory's packaging folks are just fine. Trying to think what else we consign. Not much. This is what gets called, it's more what gets called contract manufacturing.
So you just say, hey, here are the parts. We need these parts and we need them here. You guys deal with all this side of it. And we just want to see the finished product, basically.
We need parts that meet these specs. Sometimes sometimes we will appoint a specific manufacturer or supplier. We'll say, you can buy these parts, but you have to buy them from this person.
Okay.
When we consign parts, they show up on the bill of materials outside the line item where the factory has added their profit. The factory, a good bill of materials from a factory should show you what they are paying for each thing and then what their markup is, like what profit they're taking on everything. And they're not generally supposed to be adding that markup if you are they can't do it if you're paying for the parts.
That makes sense. Yeah.
It makes tons of sense.
Yeah.
But like our old factory or our old salesperson tried very hard to scuttle any time that we were going to. Yeah.
So is there anything that's been easier this go round than it was with the Atrius or with the Model 1? I mean, it seems like everything has been, you've learned something every time, it sounds like.
So a lot of it is, the actual flow is a lot easier than with the Model 1 because we already have a factory that we know and trust and who actually took custody of the Model 1 tooling. So we didn't have to start totally from scratch. We could they modified some of the tooling rather than making it from the beginning. Mm-hmm. A lot of the aspects of the design are already constrained. We're setting ourselves up a little bit of difficulty switching from an AVR to a Cortex M4 that we need to write code for, but that's just code. Mm-hmm. The supply chain stuff is absolutely bonkers this time. Getting parts was not a problem in previous iterations.
The before times.
Yeah, in the before times. Hopefully the future times, but that may, everything we're hearing is that this is going to run another year.
I mean, the thing that
the Chipocalypse.
The thing that I've always heard is that it's always easier to turn stuff off than on, and that when you turn things back on again, you can expect anywhere from 24 to 48 months of disruption, depending on how deep up the line the disruption started. But they don't start manufacturing until everything's there, obviously, because once the line's going, you don't want to stop the line. So with
smaller production runs, it's a little different. They may, because they'll do a pilot run, which is probably going to be about 100 units. It's what we sold on Kickstarter as the early delivery units. Mm-hmm. And so based on that, they'll then, we may make some small changes. They will refine the assembly process. And then when they do mass production, they would obviously rather have everything come in 3 days before they start doing final assembly.
Okay.
In reality, some stuff may show up much earlier and stuff may accrete. Like especially, we're right now talking about buying chips 6 months, 5 months before we would be using them.
Yeah.
Which in the before times was unheard of.
But now it seems to like it makes good sense because of the Chipocalypse.
All of the electrical designers who do small electronics that I talk to, and actually folks who work for a fruit company in Cupertino we've talked to, have basically been saying, we've been pre-buying a year's worth of electronics.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of it they can do pretty quickly because our assembly factory, their specialty is both assembly and injection molding. So they can just kind of kick that out relatively quickly once everything is signed off on.
So what happens once the Kickstarter is done, Jesse? Will you continue? Are you going to continue making the Model 100, or is it going to be like, is it going to be an ongoing production of this, or is this something that you're going to do in batches or TBD?
Our goal is to have products in stock for people to buy. We are a small company and we have a very weird business model. We sell products to consumers for cash money, for fiat currency, for more than it costs us to make them.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Radically innovative.
Yeah.
Yeah. Should patent that business model.
Your user acquisition process is just to make something good that people want to spend money on?
Our user acquisition process is primarily make something so good that people want to spend money on it and tell their friends about how much they love it. We have been flirting with small amounts of advertising, but it is nowhere near as good as our word of mouth conversion.
Beautiful. Brad, you got anything else? I think I'm probably wrapped up.
I think you kind of touched on this a minute ago. The only question I had from like practically the beginning of the episode was you talked about like somebody hitting you up for the foot on a keyboard that they want a replacement for. And you're like, we don't just have a bin of those, they were made special out of a mold.
We should have had a bin.
Hindsight is 2020. But the question I have is like, so you set up your custom production lines, the molds are made. If you're not making, if those lines are not running forever, obviously they're going to get dismantled and other products will be made in their place. But do you keep those molds? Do they get mothballed so you could make more of those products in the future if you needed to? Or does those get broken down and reused? Or
Oh, yeah. The factory is supposed to, we own them and they're in the factory's custody, and the factory is supposed to maintain them in working order for us.
Okay.
And so for the Atrius, we've actually done a couple of production runs. And so when we want more, they mount them, they have a giant chain lift running through the warehouse, and they attach a chain to the tool that they want, and they hoist it up and bring it over to the mold and slam it in place. And then they make more. And the usual guidance that we get is that they really don't want to put the tooling on the mold for less than a day. And so that's probably like at least 1,000 shots.
So basically that timing is what determines how your minimum order for, theoretically at least.
Well, either your minimum order or the minimum cost for your order.
Got it.
They'll make me one, but they're not going to be happy about it, and they're going to charge me as if they made me hundreds.
Okay, got it.
So they may as well make me the hundreds.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool. I mean, this has been fabulous, Jesse. Thank you so much. If people want to find out about the Model 100 or Keyboardio, what's the best place for them to go?
Shop.keyboard.io certainly works. We are at Keyboardio on Twitter. We are not very good at Facebook, and we are too old to be any good at all at TikTok.
Oh, I feel like I would watch some injection molding TikToks all day long. I'm not going to lie.
Untapped market.
We absolutely should. What's funny is like one of our vendors saw our video on Douyin, the Chinese version of TikTok. Like it looks like a Chinese company that will proxy Kickstarter back for you. Like it was our video with some content overlaid on top of it.
Oh, wow. For they were then
back this Kickstarter.
And they were, wow, that's fascinating.
We've seen that in Japan too. Like we've seen companies in Japan listing our product as something they can sell and then ordering them. We also about 3 times a day get spam from Japanese vendors that want to be our representatives in Japan or to run a crowdfunding campaign for us in Japan. And the emails are very clearly templated. They are all derivatives of the same template. It's like, hello, my name is, I am the president of blank. One of them started with, hello, my name is administrator.
Okay.
But like, I don't know what the deal is.
Yeah.
Like, but it really is like 3 of these a day.
Wow. It's fascinating. Well, thank you so much, Jesse. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, and, thank you. Like, manufacturing is such a black box for people for basically everybody who doesn't work in it. So, like, getting this kind of insight into that world and what it takes to actually get it done is really fascinating.
Thank you. It's fun to chat.
Brad, it's the time of the show where we thank our patrons.
Thank you, patrons.
Thank you, patrons. As always, we appreciate all of you. Everybody who listens, we appreciate.
Yeah.
We especially appreciate the patrons who help support the show financially, because we are 100% listener supported. There's no ads. There's no sponsors.
No.
There's no big money rolling in here to to influence us.
Grassroots.
Yes, we are from the people. And if you would like to help support the show, you can by going to patreon.com/techpod. That's patreon.com/techpod. Did you know I was told that if you want to have people remember something, you say it 3 times, Brad?
3 times?
3 times.
Here,
so
I
like
was thinking like twice was like, man, he's really going for it here.
The media training people said 3 times, which is why I'm going to say it again. Patreon.com/techpod. You can get access to the fabulous TechPod Discord, where we have great conversations pretty much every day.
About everything.
Topics of note.
Under the sun. Yes.
Today, I talked about, well, I can't talk about that on the podcast.
Boy, what is being discussed in there?
Well, look, we had an after dark tech pod conversation. We did talk about, the prophecy did come true though last week.
What's the prophecy?
Do you know what January 21st is every year?
Hang on. I'm trying to think. I do not.
It's International Sweatpants Tech Pod Day.
Oh,
Brad.
Wow.
Yeah.
We've only got, 6 months to go.
We're not going to be in Trolls 2, unfortunately, but we do have International Sweatpants Day. So
that's fantastic.
Mission accomplished. This is not the last episode of the month. This is the last episode of the month.
Close enough. We'll do emails next week.
But we have to thank a lot more patrons as a result of that. So, as always, thank you to our executive producer tier patrons, Andrew Slosky, David Allen, Jacob Chappell, James Kamek, Joel Krauska, The Bunny Fiend, and Twinkle Twinkie. But also, once a month, we thank our associate producer level patrons, Alejandro Navarro, Andre Burke, Arthur Gies, Brad Van Orman, Brian Rabe, Dan Brockman, Dave Yulian, David Fan, Donato Sinoco III. I'm a third too, Brad.
I didn't know that.
Graham Banks, Jacob Wilson, Jad Rita, Jason Nealand, Jay Maybe, Jorge Pereira, Josh Klein, Julian, Sanchit Kumar, Terry Cox, Thomas Shea, and Wedge. Thank you all so much. We appreciate it so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'm very excited.
Yes.
Well, a little piece of business, a point of order here.
Yes.
I've been saying for the last 5 months that we should do this, and we've never done it.
What is well, yes.
Here we go. Emails next week. Send in your emails. We always forget to solicit emails on the prior show to the email show.
Absolutely. Yes. So how do you send an email into the podcast, Brad?
Is it techpod@content.town?
That is correct. It is techpod@content.town. Wait, what's that address one more time?
I cannot believe they made a top level domain called .town, but they did it. It is techpod@content.town.
So again, if you want to support the Patreon, it's patreon.com/techpod. We appreciate it so much. And the email address is techpod@content.town. If you're in the Discord, if you're already a patron, you can just go into the Q&A section into the channel that is labeled Questions Seeking Answers.
That's right.
Where you can scream into the void. You post a question, it disappears after a moment.
Drop them in there. Nobody but us will ever see it.
Yeah. Also people who are in the channel at that exact same moment will see it briefly, but then it'll go away.
That's a minor loophole. We don't talk about that.
Look, I don't want people to put any confessions that are going to be actionable. We have mandatory reporters in there. Anyway, we will see you all next week. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend. Thanks again to Jesse for being on the show. I learned a lot about manufacturing today, and
same. Absolutely.
I knew it was complicated, but I don't think I knew it was going to be that complicated.
That was a lot. I don't think I will try to make any keyboards anytime soon, or maybe anything else ever.
I want to shoot some caps, man. I want to feel those fresh keycaps right off the injection molds.
What you do on your own time is your business.
See y'all next week. Bye, everybody.